Hello, everyone. Today we will be speaking about ongoing COP27, Conference of Parties 27 happening in Egypt. And this week is very crucial because of ongoing negotiations and what they have been negotiating on adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, and a lot of other opportunities and collaboration. It will be finalized in this week and announced on whatever parties have agreed on. And what are the updates so far? What are the negotiations? What are the news from Pakistani pavilion? To discuss all this, we have with us Dr. Abid Qaiyum Suleri, who heads independent think tank Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Islamabad. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Abid, you were in Egypt and just came back from there. And you have been part of delegation from civil society organizations as well, and as an independent observer as well. How this COP is different than previous COPs you have been attending and part of?
Well, there were a couple of, I think, salient features of Sharm Sheikh, and one is mindful of the fact that this COP is being held in Africa. And African countries, like all other developing countries, they are suffering from the global emission, mostly emission in the developed world. So the mood was slightly different, and mood was of some sort of, if I can use the word rebellion, that if loss and damage and climate financing are the unmet commitments, if they would be again ignored, the developing countries, they would react to it, and they will give a strong rebuttal. Second, I would say that Pakistan's unfortunate floods, they have sort of set the scene, sort of a trailer, how developing countries, they would be suffering at the hands of changing climate and warming planet if the developed countries, they don't fulfill their commitment, not only the financing commitment, but also the ambitions, raising their ambitions and reducing carbon emissions. Now, for the viewers, we should know that there are three major pillars of every COP since the COP15 in Paris, the COP 2015 of Paris. The first one is about ambition, the mitigation part of it, that countries, they should reduce their carbon emissions so that we can try to contain global warming. And now the science tells us that the quote-unquote, the so-called 1.5 degrees Celsius self-imposed target that international community and the international world had imposed to itself, that is not going to matter. Now, if we are not able to meet that target, then what would happen? And that's where adaptation comes. And we saw that Pakistan's floods. And here I'm not trying to say that some of the things could have been improved in Pakistani context as well, when we talk of bringing our own house in order. But predominantly, it was due to a warming planet, and it was due to a warming Indian Ocean. So this is what would happen, and for that we need to adapt. And in order to adapt, again, the developing countries, they require funding. And the third part of it, which is again quite important, that is about the transition cost. That yes, apart from adaptation and mitigation, countries, they need to transit, especially transit to renewable energy. And developing countries who are already marginalized, excluded, crowded out, how they would be able to transit to renewable energy, leaving fossil fuels aside. And this Sharm Sheikh, so far it had all three components, and ultimately, as one can see, the things are evolving, that loss and damage, not only for the first time in the history of COP, it became part of agenda on the strong insistence, and I would also give credit to Pakistan's leadership in it. Pakistan is leading G77 plus China. So this collective pressure was vital to have loss and damage financing an agenda. And now we can see that things are gradually unfolding. One is not very optimistic or very hopeful that everything would be hunky-dory at the end of this week when COP concludes, but at least some progress towards right direction.
Thank you for sharing a lot of details along with COP for viewers who are not technical as well. So one thing which you just mentioned about losses and damage agenda, which has been included this year's COP, which is itself a huge success. But when we look at the history in past 30 years, and when we also discuss about Warsaw International Mechanism and Paris Agreement and all that, there have been discussions going on between developing and developed countries. A lot of negotiations, a lot of workshops, a lot of meetings already happening. And at the end of the day, zero result when it comes to providing $100 billion per year to the developing nations by the rich countries because of their emissions. Because of their emissions, developing countries are, suffering. Now, the latest development which has happened in Egypt during these negotiations, and you must be aware that now the developed world, the rich nations, are trying to divert discussion towards global shield, while developing countries are demanding for the loss and damage facility or Santiago framework or network. So how do you see these negotiations moving forward, and what are particularly demands of developing countries? Like I know there are like demands associated with loss and damage and Santiago network and all that and facility. But what are the specific demands by G77 and China, and how do you see it's moving forward by the end of this week?
Miriam, first thing first, I'm a firm believer of multilateralism. There is no alternative to multilateralism. Of course, it's slow. We know that many of the promises, they are still unmet, but then we don't have an alternative to UNFCCC or an alternative to multilateralism, where all the developing nations and least developed countries, they can come and they can raise their concerns and they can try to sort them out. Having said it, this snail pace and the delay in outcomes of different decisions which were taken in Paris and before, now that has started haunting the poor nations and the global south. The major the issue or the controversy over loss and damage financing is defining the scope of it and its legal implication. Of course, countries like US, they're quite mindful of the fact that if it gets established that the victims of carbon emission and emission of the largest emitters, they can claim compensation for their losses, damages, and non-economic losses and damages. It would open up a huge Pandora box, and then there would be no limit to the legal actions and legal claims. Now, while that would get discussed, and perhaps it may take a few more COPs before a tangible decision is made on the definition of loss and damage, what attribute to how to attribute it, and what sort of compensation countries can claim for it. Some of the developed nations, especially the G7, they came up with an idea of a global shield, which is sort of a climate insurance mechanism. It was for, I think, on the demand of V20, the vulnerable 20 countries who wanted some sort of quick compensation or wanted some sort of quick shelter from climate these eventualities and consequences. So Germany has came up as a major funder, provided the seed funding of this 210 million euro insurance mechanism, and it would be for the most vulnerable countries in order to provide insurance in case of both the slow onset of climate losses like drought and the climate extremes like floods. But then here comes the issue of climate justice. And the issue of climate justice is that if now with the help of data, it can be established that the extreme climate event, they are due to the historical emission of developed nation. And I'm not talking, when I'm talking of historical, I'm not talking of last century or more than 100-year emission. I'm talking of more recent years as well. Now we have the scenarios and models which tells us that what was the contribution of largest emitters during last 20 or last 30 years, last 50 years, and how it had affected a warming planet. So no, the climate justice, it requires that the countries, they should somehow start realizing on the principle of equity and these shared but differentiated responsibilities. And shared but differentiated responsibilities mean that if you are responsible for major emissions, you would have to contribute more, and those who are not responsible for those emissions, they would have to contribute less. So on the principle of equity and on this differentiated responsibilities, G77 in China, they have moved a suggestion, and the suggestion is to have a loss and damage fund. They have moved this suggestion to govern this fund through independent board of governors, maybe comprising of 35 members, 5 each from Caribbean and Africa, Asia, Pacific, LDCs, and the small island states, and 15 from the developed nations. So the proposal is that there must be around 35 board members in this fund facility. A committee is proposed, that a committee should be formed that should work on an expedited manner, and by March 2023, in next 3 to 4 months, it should define the scope of loss and damage fund. It should define how will it complement the previous commitments on climate financing, and it should evolve some sort of mechanism of accessibility and how to lodge a claim, how the countries, they can be compensated. Of course, I'm just trying to be non-technical and giving to the crux of it. But this is the summary. So now we have a proposal, a tangible proposal on table on which a negotiation would be taking place. On one hand, we have a global shield mechanism, which is already there. On the other hand, we have this G77 plus China's proposal that would come under discussion. And even if it's not adapted as such, there would be, it would be referred to some sort of finance committee or some committee, which means that in the next COP that is going to be held in Dubai in 2023, there would be some sort of progress to it. And the third and important thing is that now one can see innovative financing mechanism. In Glasgow, we saw a group of countries, they provided support to South Africa for phasing out its fossil fuel. Now in this Sharm el-Sheikh, the G20 countries, they have come up with this proposal for Indonesia in the run-up to G20 Bali summit that started from yesterday, that G20 would be supporting Indonesia for phasing out its fossil fuel. So I think these bilateral and multilateral mechanisms, they are now being picked up, and Pakistani floods and all other extreme events across globe, the heat wave in UK, the typhoons and cyclones in Philippines and in many parts of the US, and then drought conditions, these heat waves, forest fires in Australia and other places. So all these extreme events, they are bringing climate change and losses and damage due to a changing climate on radar, and it would not be now possible for international community to ignore these issues and discussion on it for an indefinite period of time.
Sure. So, talking about developing country, I'm particularly interested to know more, and I'm sure viewers would also be interested to know more about what was happening in Pakistani pavilion. We know that there were some internet issues and connectivity issues over there. That's why we couldn't follow that what really is happening there. But through some tweets by federal minister or the delegates which were over there, we were just trying to follow up what is happening from there. So, first question is that how do you see the press conference of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif? I mean, does it have any kind of impact over there because you were physically there? And secondly, what are the other news from Pakistani Pavilion, and what are they doing there? Is it like really having impact on the other delegates and leaders coming from other parts of the world over there, really impacting them in a positive way?
Well, I must give credit to government of Pakistan for providing leadership to G77 plus China, our negotiators, mainly comprising of the veterans from Foreign Office. They are playing a key role in these multilateral negotiations. The presser of Prime Minister, which was also joined by UN Secretary General, and it was on the opening day when UN Secretary General he came to any pavilion. The message was quite clear from both the leaders, from the Prime Minister as well as from the Secretary General. And Secretary General was, he didn't mince his word when he said that Pakistan is suffering from losses and damages due to climate change. He said there are losses, there are damages due to climate change, and countries like Pakistan, they should be provided justice, and in the form of debt relief, in the form of debt swap, and in the form of fulfilling other climate financing commitment. And I think that set the tone. So we need to remember that the first week of any COP, where high-level discussion, political discussion takes place, it actually sets a tone for negotiators. So when all the heads of states and governments and UN Secretary General, etc., when they show their commitment and resolve to move forward, that actually makes the task of negotiators much easy, because then they follow their leaders' vision and they try to be part of a solution. Second, this time in Pakistan Pavilion, it was, I would say, it is being appropriately utilized. Almost 2 events per day in the pavilion. The pavilion is open, like always, for civil society delegates to use as their hub. So the scholars, not only from Pakistan, and climate scientists and climate activists, not only from Pakistan, but other part of the world, they're part of these panels, and a lot of fruitful discussion is taking place. Today, while we are recording this vlog, the climate change minister, she would be part of an important UNFCCC panel discussing climate loss and damage fund and loss and damage agenda. And I hope that she, as a chair of G77 and China, she would be highlighting the proposal and give some more details on how to move about it. So I'm happy and satisfied with the progress and the performance of Pakistani delegation. I would say that over the years, this is improving, and it is a positive sign that Pakistan is getting recognized. And this year, due to the unfortunate flood too, the impact of climate change and Pakistan, both of them, they became a synonym, and there was more emphasis on what is coming from Pakistan.
Well, these are some very positive news from Pakistani Pavilion, and one of the unique thing this year was also that this delegation was like from different political parties, Prime Minister from PML and Minister Saiba from PPP, and Bilawal Bhutto from also from PPP. So you know, talking about delegates coming in Egypt and COP27. We followed that, you know, this year the funder was, one of the funder was among the biggest polluter. And I think you know that I am talking about Coca-Cola. And also among delegates, 600 members were from top emitters, So, biggest funder and a lot of delegates, 600, around 600 delegates, these are polluters. So, I mean, do you think that they can really kind of negatively impact negotiation process, or really impact the negotiations going on related to loss and damage or finances, or this can provide kind of more opportunities or collaborations for developing countries? How do you see that?
Well, Mariam, in the COP resolution, the decisions are taken on the basis of consensus. Even one single country can block the whole resolution and the decision. Now, we have two approaches. One approach is that we declare corporate sector as paria, and we stop talking to them, and we let them do whatever they have to do, and we just, and from the developing countries and the climate activists, we just keep on raising our voice and naming and shaming. So this is one approach. The second approach is where we bring those polluters on table, and we try to negotiate them, not only in terms of putting pressure on them so that they actually mend their behaviors, but also to be part of a solution. And I'm not saying the first approach is better than the second, or second approach is better than the first. Perhaps in the world of negotiation, we have to use everything, carrot and stick. So while those who believe in activism, they should keep up their pressure, and those who believe in resolving these issues through negotiations, they should also keep on doing their effort, so that we can ultimately, both of these groups, they require some sort of solution, and they require some sort of moderation in increase in global temperature. So I don't see any harm in corporate sector financing these COPs. Even in Glasgow, we had corporate sector there. Now we have corporate sector, and in fact, when the companies like Coca, many others, when they join hand in sustainability, there is a pressure on them to then rethink of their operations to make them more sustainable and to turn them green. And that is a positive side of it. Now, the negative side, as you said, that there may be some areas where they can influence the agenda, but just think of a world where we don't engage with corporate sector at all. So do you think that by not engaging them, we'll be able to resolve these climate change issues? We can only do it if whole of the world, international community, they boycott the products of corporate sector. No, can you boycott using toothpaste, and can you boycott using these sanitizers and soaps and toiletries and all the kitchen items? So if you will keep on supporting these corporate groups as your consumerism in any way, so then why not to bring them on table and start negotiating with them? But this is my personal opinion, and I respect the opinion of those who think otherwise.
Well, if private sector is earning 200 billion profit in just 3 months, I think there is need that they pay for those damages because of their emissions as well. Let's see how it goes in the future as well. Well, we are.
But your spending is part of that 200 billion profit. So stop. So of course, consumers, we urge private sector to produce those things that we have to consume. So either we adopt to a purely organic lifestyle, and if we cannot, then of course, as a consumer, we need to put pressure on these producers to be more responsible by producing, and that is the whole spirit of sustainable production and sustainable consumption.
Well, yes, sustainability is the wonderful angle to look towards it, because as a consumer, we do need things on daily basis to survive, and that demands increases with increase in population. So I'm coming towards the last question of this vlog now, is that, I know that there are like mixed responses when it comes to results of COP, every COP. And partly you have addressed this in the beginning as well, but how optimistic you are by the end of this week for COP27?
Well, successful negotiation, the sign of successful negotiations are that everyone leaves the room equally unhappy. Of course, while developing countries, they would be able to gain something, they would be losing on many fronts, and while developed countries, they would not be bending upon many of the demands of developing world. They would have to, in the interest of keeping the multilateralism, work at least fulfill some of the demands. So it's a glass half full. We should tame our expectation. As I said, that we shouldn't assume that a single meeting or a single COP would take care of all of our woes. Of course, it would not happen. But as long as we stick to the principle of multilateralism and we stick to resolving these issues through negotiations, things they would keep on moving to the right direction. The only thing that I want to remind to the parties, both developing world and developed world, which are busy negotiating this week, that time is the essence. They said justice delayed is justice not served, justice denied. And similarly, climate justice delayed, it would have huge consequences, loss and damage, economic consequences, non-economic consequences, and being responsible citizen of this planet, we need to expedite the resolution of these long-standing issues so that our future generations, they can breathe in some pleasant atmosphere.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Abid Qaiyum Suleri, for giving us time today.